Okay, we're going to continue to finish the reading of the text of the Gosho on establishing the correct teaching for the peace of the land. Last time we were together, which was last week, we got up to Q5. We went all the way through 4.
Cool.
So at this point in time, I'm going to do just a quick review. I mean, basically, we know that this is all based on the fact that Kaganobu, right, is the Hojo Tokiyori is the government official that I think he's talking to here. Yeah. Okay, so at any rate, he qualifies at the very beginning. The guest comes in and says, you know, wow, everything's screwed up. The host then gives him a basic understanding of what he thinks is at the root cause. The guest then qualifies, the guest qualifies where you're getting your information. We're a Buddhist country. Of course, this has nothing to do with we're not treating Buddhism right. And so then the Daishonin goes through all kinds of different sutras. The Great Collection Sutra, he quotes. The Benevolent King Sutra, the Medicine Master Sutra, the Benevolent King Sutra again. And gets all of this information and input out from the contents of the sutra. And then the guest gets a little upset because he feels that you're giving Nimbutsu a bad name, or you're blaming it on Nimbutsu. Nimbutsu is what's protecting us. And then Daishonin goes on to explain to him, no, that's not the case at all. All right, so we're now over on page 15. We stopped on the middle of first column. I'm going to go back to the first column of page 14, all right, where he says, now we have come to this latest age. Okay? And this is, again, the Daishonin answering him. He's qualifying. Now we have come to this latter age when people are no longer sages. Each enters his own dark road, and all alike forget the way. How pitiful that no one cures them of their blindness. How painful to see them taking up these false beliefs in vain. He's talking about Nimbutsu. He's already qualified this earlier. As a result, everyone from the ruler on down, the ruler of the nation on down to the common people, believes that there are no true sutras outside of the 3 Pure Land Sutras, and no Buddhas other than the Buddha Amida with his 2 attendants. Once there were men like Dengyo, Gishin, Jikaku, and Shisho, who journeyed 10,000 miles across the waves to China to acquire the sacred teachings, and there visited the mountains and rivers to pay reverence to the Buddha statues and carry them back. In some cases, they built holy temples on the peaks of high mountains in which to preserve those scriptures and statues. In other cases, they constructed sacred halls in the bottoms of deep valleys where such objects could be worshipped and honored. As a result, the Buddha's Shakyamuni and Medicine Master shone side by side, casting their influence upon present and future ages, while the Bodhisattva Space Treasury and Earth Repository brought benefit to the living and the dead. The rulers of the nation contributed districts or villages so that the lamps might continue to burn bright before the images, while the stewards of the great estates gave their fields and gardens as an offering. But because of this book by Honen, this Nimbutsu chosen above all, the Lord of Teaching, Shakyamuni, is forgotten, and all honor is paid to Amida, the Buddha of the Western region. The transmission of the law from Shakyamuni Buddha is ignored, and Medicine Master, the thus come one of the Eastern region, is neglected. Attention is paid only to the 3 Pure Land Sutras in 4 volumes, and all the other wonderful scriptures that Shakyamuni expounded throughout the 5 periods of his preaching life are cast aside. If temples are not dedicated to Amida, then people no longer have any desire to support them or pay honor to the Buddhas enshrined there. If priests are not practitioners of the Nimbutsu, then people quickly forget all about giving those priests alms. As a result, the halls of the Buddha have fallen into ruin, scarcely a wisp of smoke rising above their moss-covered tile roofs, and the priest quarters have become empty and dilapidated. The dew deep on the grasses in their courtyards, and in spite of such conditions, no one gives a thought to protecting the law or to restoring the temples. Hence the sage priests who once presided over the temples leave and do not return, and the benevolent deities who guarded the nation depart and no longer appear. This has all come about because of this Nimbutsu chosen above all by Honen. How pitiful to think that in the space of a few decades, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people have been deluded by these devilish teachings, and in so many cases confused as to the true teachings of Buddhism. If people favor what is only incidental and forget what is primary, can there be benevolent deities? Can the benevolent deities be anything but angry? If people cast aside what is perfect and take up what is biased, can the world escape the plot of demons? Rather than offering up 10,000 prayers for remedy, it would be better simply to outlaw this one evil. He's talking about Nimbutsu again. May I have a tissue? Just one, that's fine. Thanks. In case I need it. Okay, so now we go on to Q5 there's a total of 10 questions, right? So we're at the middle now. In the middle of page 15. This time the guest was truly enraged and said, in the ages since our original teacher, the Buddha Shakyamuni, preached the 3 Pure Land Sutras, the Dharma teacher Tan Luen had originally studied the 4 treatises, but abandoned them and put all his faith in the Pure Land teachings. Similarly, the medicine master Tao Cho ceased to spread the very practices of the Nirvana Sutra and devoted all of his attention to propagating the practice that lead ones to the Western Pure Land. The Reverend Shantao discarded the sundry practices and established the single practice of the Nimbutsu, and the superior of priests Eshin collected essential passages from various sutras to form his work, making the single practice of the Nimbutsu the essence of his teaching. Such was the manner in which these men honored and respected the Buddha Amida, and uncountable numbers of people, as a result, were able to gain rebirth in the Pure Land, and the western region, where he's hanging out, Amida. Of particular note was the sage Honen, who as a child entered the monastery of Mount Hei. Okay, so he started out as a disciple he went to Dingo. That Mount Hei is that, okay? By the time he was 17, he had worked his way through all 60 volumes of Tendai literature, because, of course, Mount Hei was a Tendai temple, right? And had investigated all the 8 schools and mastered their essentials. In addition, he had read through the entire body of sutras and treatises 7 times and exhausted all works of exegesis and biography. His wisdom shone like the sun and moon, and his virtue exceeded that of the earlier teachers. In spite of all this, he was in doubt as to the proper path to emancipation and could not make out the true meaning of nirvana. Therefore, he read and examined all the texts he could, pondered deeply and considered every possibility, and in the end put aside all the sutras and concentrated on the single practice of Nimbutsu. In addition, he received confirmation of his decision when Shantao miraculously appeared to him in a dream, and he proceeded to spread his doctrines among friends and strangers in all 4 corners of the land. Thereafter, he was hailed as a reincarnation of the Bodhisattva Great Power, or was revered as Shantao Reborn. In every quarter, people of eminent and lowly birth alike bowed their heads in respect, and men and women from all over Japan sought him. Since that time, the springs and autumns have succeeded each other, and the years have piled upon years. And yet you, the guest speaking to the host, and yet you insist upon putting aside the venerable teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha contained in the Pure Land Sutras, and willfully speak evil of the passage describing the oath of the Buddha Amida. Why do you try to blame the sacred age of Honen for the disasters of recent years, going out of your way to slander the former teachers of the Pure Land doctrines and to heap abuse on the sage Honen? Are you, as the saying goes, deliberately blowing back the fur and hunting for flaws in the leather, deliberately piercing the skin in hopes of drawing blood? From ancient times to the present, the world has never seen such a speaker of evil as you, host. You had better learn a little caution and restraint. When you pile up such grave offenses, how can you hope to escape punishment? I am afraid to even sit here in your company. I must take up my staff and be on my way. in reply. The host that I've shown. The host, smiling, restrained his guest and said, insects that live in the smartweed never forget how bitter it tastes. Those who stay long in privies forget how foul the smell is. Here you listen to my good words and think them wicked. Point to a slanderer of the law, Honan, and call him a sage. Mistrust a correct teacher and take him for an evil priest. He's talking about you're calling me evil, okay? You point to the slander of the law and call him a sage and mistrust a correct teacher. He's talking about himself. And take him for an evil priest. Your confusion is great indeed, and your offense anything but light, because you're slandering now, guest. Listen to my explanation of how this confusion arose, and let us discuss the matter in detail. Because the thing about Honan is said that these 3 Pure Land Sutras were all from Shakyamuni, so they must be cool, right? So Shakyamuni, he continues. Shakyamuni Buddha, well, in other words, they're from the original teacher of Buddhism, right? Shakyamuni Buddha expounded the 5 periods of doctrines, established the order in which they were preached, and divided them into the provisional and true teachings. But Tu Luen, Tao Cho, and Shantao embraced the provisional teachings and forgot about the true ones, went by what had been taught in the earlier period of the Buddha's life, and discarded what was taught later. They were not the kind of men who delve into the deep places of Buddhist doctrine. Honan, in particular, though he followed the practices abdicated by those earlier men, was ignorant as to their source. How do we know this? Because he lumped together all of the 637 Mahayana scriptures in 2,883 volumes, and along with him all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and the deities of this world, and urged people to discard, close, ignore, and abandon them with these 4 injunctions, corrupting the hearts of all people. Thus he poured out perverted words of his own invention and took absolutely no cognizance of the explanations put forth in the Buddhist scriptures. He is the worst kind of baseless talk, a clear case of defamation. His is the worst kind of baseless talk, a clear case of defamation, top of page 16, second column. There are no words to describe it, no way to censure it that is not too mild. And yet people put all their faith in this baseless talk of his, and without exception pay honor to his Nimbutsu chosen above all. As a consequence, they revere the 3 sutras of the Pure Land and cast all the other sutras aside. They look up to one Buddha alone, Amida of the land of perfect bliss, and forget about the other Buddhas. A man such as Honan is in truth the arch enemy of the Buddhas of the scriptures and the foe of a sage of sage priests and ordinary men and women alike. And now his distorted teachings have spread throughout the 8 regions of the country, permeating the 10 directions. You became quite horrified when I blamed an earlier period for the disasters that have occurred in recent years. Perhaps I should cite a few examples from the past to show you that you are mistaken in your feelings. The 2nd volume of Great Concentration and Insight. So now what did he just do? He switched right back into Tentai. Okay? The 2nd volume of Great Concentration and Insight quotes a passage from the records of the historian that says, in the closing years of the Chao dynasty, there were persons who let their hair hang down, went about naked to the waist, they went shirtless, and did not observe the rites and regulations. The annotations on Great Concentration and Insight in the 2nd volume explains this passage by quoting from Tso's commentary on Spring and Autumn Annuals as follows. When King Ping of the Chao first moved his capital to the east, he saw men by the Yi River who let their hair hang down and performed sacrifices in the fields. Some who had great understanding said, in less than 100 years the dynasty will fall, for the rites are already neglected. From this it is evident that the portent appears first, and later the disaster itself comes about. The Great Concentration and Insight passage goes on to say, Wan Qi was a man of extraordinary talent, but he let his hair grow like a mass of brambles and left his belt undone. Later, the sons of the aristocracy all imitated him, until those who behaved in the churlish and insulting manner were thought to be acting quite naturally. That reminds me of something kind of current. And those who were restrained and proper in their behavior were ridiculed as mere peasants. This was a sign that the Sima family, the rulers of the Western Qin dynasty, would meet with their downfall. Similarly, the record of a pilgrimage to China in search of the law by the great teacher Jikaku states that in the first year of the Hui Chang era, 841, Emperor Wuzong of the Tang dynasty commanded the priest Qing Xuan of the Changqing Si temple to transmit the Nembutsu teachings of the Buddha Amida in the various temples. Qing Xuan spent 3 days in each temple, going about from one temple to another without ever ceasing. In the second year of the same era, soldiers from the land of the Uyghurs invaded the borders of the Tang Empire. In the third year of the same era, the regional commander of the area north of the Yellow River suddenly raised a revolt. Later, the kingdom of Tibet was once more refused to obey orders from China, and the Uyghurs repeatedly seized Chinese territory. On the whole, the conflicts and uprisings were like those that prevailed at the time when the Qin dynasty and the military leader Suang Yu were overthrown and the towns and villages were devastated by fire and other disasters. What was even worse, Emperor Wuzong carried out a vast campaign to wipe out Buddhist teachings and destroyed a great many temples and pagodas. He was never able to put down the uprisings and died in agony shortly after. This is the passage from Jikaku's original. This is the essence of Jikaku's original passage. In view of these events, we should consider the fact that Honan belonged to the time of the retired Emperor Go-Toba, around the Kannon era, which would have been 1201 to 1204. And what happened to the retired emperor is evident before our very eyes, okay? Does anybody remember the retired Emperor Go-Toba, what happened to him? He tried to go up against the shogunates and got defeated and was exiled, him and 2 other guys. Thus, Tang China provided an earlier example of the fall of an emperor, and our own country offers similar proof. So what he's basically saying, he's referring to all of these issues historically that occurred when such and such went to the Yellow River and saw the guy with the long hair and his belt and, all that stuff. All right? He's saying that we already know that the act that creates the retribution occurs before the retribution occurs. They don't necessarily occur simultaneously. And he said, and what happened to the retired emperor is evident before our very eyes. You can go look up number 43 there. Thus, the Tang China provided an earlier example of the fall of an emperor, and our own country offers similar proof. You should neither doubt this nor consider it strange. The only thing to do now is to abandon the evil ways and take up those that are good, to cut off this affliction at the source, to cut it off at the root. The guest, looking somewhat mollified, said, though I have not yet probed deeply in the matter. In other words, everything I just quoted, I really don't know anything about. That's what they told me. Though I have not yet probed deeply into the matter, I believe I understand to some degree what you are saying. Nevertheless, throughout the area from Kyoto, the capital, to Kamakura, the headquarters of the shogun, there are numerous eminent Buddhist leaders and key figures in the clergy, and yet none of them has so far appealed to the shogun concerning this affair or submitted a memorial to the throne. You, on the other hand, a person of humble position, think nothing of spewing out offensive accusations. Your assertion goes too far, and your behavior is unreasonable. So he's saying, Look, none of the other priests of the other sects have made a big deal about Honan. Why are you? Okay, that's what that question was. The host in response said, though I may be a person of little ability, I have reverently given myself to the study of the Mahayana. So he's, again, making that distinction. A blue fly, if it clings to the tail of a thoroughbred horse, can travel 10,000 miles, and the green ivy that twines around the tall pine can grow to 1,000 feet. I was reborn as the son of the one Buddha, Shakyamuni, and I serve the kings of scriptures, the king of scriptures, the Lotus Sutra. How could I observe the decline of the Buddhist law and not be filled with emotions of pity and distress? Moreover, the Nirvana Sutra states, even if a good monk sees someone destroying the teachings and disregards him, failing to reproach him, to oust him, or to punish him for his offense, then you should realize that that monk is betraying the Buddhist teachings. But if he ousts the destroyer of the law, if reproaches him or punishes him, then he is my disciple and a true voice hearer. Although I may not be a good monk, the Daishonin continues as the guest. It's first full paragraph, first column, page 18. Although I may not be a good monk, I certainly do not want to be accused of betraying the Buddha's teachings, like Honan is. Therefore, in order to avoid such charges, I have cited a few general principles and given a rough explanation of the matter to you as you asked your questions, Mr. Guest. Earlier in the Genin era, 1224 to 1225, petitions to the throne were submitted. And again, are you noticing all these mentions of eras and how short they are? Mm-hmm. They're a year or two at the most. Mm-hmm. Okay? And as we know, it was usually only when an emperor died and a new one was installed would they change the era name. Here's the second time an era is mentioned, and it's only a year old. Earlier in the Genin era, 1224 to 1225, petitions to the throne were submitted time and again by the two temples of Enrakuji and Kofukuji. And as a result, an imperial command and a letter of instruction from the shogunate were handed down ordering that the wood blocks used in printing Honan's Nembutsu, chosen above all, be confiscated and brought to the great lecture hall of Enrakuji. There they were burned in order to repay the debt owed to the Buddhas of the three existences. In addition, orders were given that the menials of Kanjin-in shrine should dig up and destroy Honan's grave. Then Honan's disciples Ryukan, Shoko, Jokaku, Sasho, and others were condemned by the imperial court to exile in distant regions and were never pardoned. In view of these facts, how can you say that no one has submitted a complaint to the authorities considering these matters? Mr. Guest, you don't know what you're talking about. The guest, continuing to speak in a mild manner, because he sees, obviously, you know a little more about all this stuff than I do. One could hardly say that Honan is the only one who disparages sutras and speaks ill of other priests, since you are doing the same yourself. However, it is true that he takes the 637 Mahayana scriptures in 2,883 volumes, along with all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and the deities of this world, and urges people to discard, close, ignore, and abandon. Those are the four things that he told everybody to do. Discard, close, ignore, and abandon them. There is no doubt that these four injunctions, that's what I was trying to think of, they're called the four injunctions, are his very words. There's no doubt that Honan said this. The meaning of the passage is quite clear. But you keep carping on this one little flaw in the jewel. Pardon me, thank you. Pardon me. Pardon me. But you keep harping on this one little flaw in the jewel and severely slandering him for it. I do not know whether he spoke out of delusion or out of enlightenment. Between you and Honan, I cannot tell which is wise and which is foolish, or determine whose assertions are right and whose are wrong. However, You assert that all the recent disasters are to be traced to Nimbutsu chosen above all, speaking quite volubly on that point and elaborating on the meanings of your assertion. Now surely the peace of the world and the stability of the nation are sought by both ruler and subject, and desired by all the inhabitants of the country. The nation achieves prosperity through the Buddhist law, and the law is proven worthy of reverence by the people who embrace it. If the nation is destroyed and the people are wiped out, then who will continue to pay reverence to the Buddhas? Who will continue to have faith in the law? Therefore, one must first of all pray for the safety of the nation, and then work to establish the Buddhist law. Now, if you know any means whereby disasters can be prevented and troubles brought to an end, I would like to hear about it. Okay, so the host says, this is the answer to question 7. The host says, there is no doubt, and it is question 7, right? Yeah, I believe so. The host says, there is no doubt that I am the foolish one. I would never dare claim to be wise. However, I would like to just quote some passages from the scriptures and offer some brief thoughts. Concerning the means for ensuring order of the nation, there are numerous passages in both Buddhist and non-Buddhist texts, and it would be difficult to cite them all here. Since taking up the study of Buddhism, however, I, the host, have frequently given thought to this matter, and it seems to me that restraining those who slander the law and respecting the followers of the correct way will ensure the stability of the nation and peace in the world at large. In the Nirvana Sutra, top of page 19, we read, the Buddha said, and this is my favorite part. In the Nirvana Sutra, we read, the Buddha said, with the exception of one type of person, you may offer alms to all kinds of persons, and everyone will praise you. Chunda, right? The blacksmith. Chunda said, what do you mean when you speak of one type of person? The Buddha replied, I mean the types described in the sutras as violators of the precepts. Chunda spoke again, saying, I am afraid I do not understand. May I ask you to explain further? The Buddha addressed Chunda in the Nirvana Sutra, saying, by violators of the precepts, I mean the Ikchantika. In the case of all other types of persons, you may offer alms, everyone will praise you, and you will achieve great rewards. Chunda spoke once more, asking, what is the meaning of the term Ikchantika? The Buddha said, Chunda, suppose there should be monks or nuns, laymen or women who speak carelessly, or who speak careless and evil words, and slander the correct teaching, and that they should go on committing these grave acts without ever showing any inclination to reform or any sign of repentance in their hearts. Persons of this kind, I would say, are following the path of Ikchantika. Okay, so let's go back over that, because Ikchantika is a very powerful, it's a big thing to call somebody. The Buddha said, Chunda, suppose there be monks or nuns, laymen or women, who speak careless and evil words. So don't mouth off about stuff you're not really sure about. Okay? And slander the correct teaching, not meaning to, but because you've been thinking that something was correct that's not correct, because you haven't studied enough to know the difference. And that they should go on committing these grave acts. They go on, not that they've just done it once and then they found out something that they repented, or they stay on this bad line. And slander the correct teaching, and that they should go on committing these grave acts without ever showing any inclination to reform or any sign of repentance in their hearts. Now the guest has shown totally, he's already opened his mind to some of the things that the host is saying, right? Mm-hmm. So he's not speaking of people like the guest, who are just Nimbutsu followers because that's what they were told to be, which is what this guy's going to admit in a minute. He goes, without ever showing any inclination to reform or any sign of repentance in their hearts. Persons of this kind, I would say, are following the path of the Ikchantika. There may be those who commit the 4 grave offenses, or are guilty of the 5 cardinal sins, and who, though aware that they are guilty of serious faults, from the beginning have no trace or fear of contrition in their hearts, or if they do, give no outward sign of it. When it comes to the correct teaching, they show no inclination to protect, treasure, and establish it over the ages, but rather speak of it with malice and contempt, their words replete with error. People of this kind, too, I would say, are following the path of the Ikchantika. With the exception of this one group of people called Ikchantika, however, you may offer alms to all others, and everyone will praise you. And why does he say you can't offer alms to Ikchantikas? What are they doing that's so wrong? What is the act of that I've just been qualifying here?
They slander.
Yeah, but how do they slander?
They follow the wrong teaching.
The wrong teaching. The wrong teaching. That's it. Elsewhere, Elsewhere in the same sutra, the Buddha spoke in these words, "When I recall the past, I remember that I was the king of a great state in this continent of Jambudvipa. My name was Senyo, and I loved and venerated the great vehicle sutras." Yeah. My heart was pure and good, and had no trace of evil, jealousy, or stinginess. Good men, at that time, I cherished the great vehicle teachings in my heart. Now, the great vehicle is really referring to the great law. The great pure law comes in the 5th 500-year period, okay? So he's talking about, okay, I cherished the great vehicle teachings, which are the Buddhism of the harvest, okay, in my heart. When I heard the Brahmins slandering these correct and equal sutras, I put them to death on the spot. Good men, as a result of that action, I never thereafter fell into hell. That was the cause I made to never, ever fall into hell. In another passage it says, "In the past, when the thus come one was the ruler of a nation and practiced the way of the Bodhisattva, he put to death a number of Brahmins." Again it says, there are 3 degrees of killing, the lower, the middle, and the upper degrees. The lower degree constitutes the killing of any humble beings, from an ant to any of the various kinds of animals. But the killing of any being that is a bodhisattva chosen to be born as an animal, okay, to help other living beings, okay, which they have the ability to be, like my puppies, okay, is excluded. As a result of a killing of the lower degree, one will fall into the realms of hell, hungry spirits, and animals, and will suffer all the pains appropriate to a killing of the lower degree. Why should this be? Because even animals and other humble beings possess the roots of goodness, insignificant though those roots may be. That is why a person who kills such a being, talking about animals, such a being, must suffer retribution for his offense. Killing, at the bottom of page 19, second column, killing any person from an ordinary mortal to an anagamin, which is the third to the, there's 4 high states to being an arhat. That's the third one. If you look up look up 46. Okay, so killing any person from an ordinary mortal to almost a Buddha. Okay, that's what an anagamin is. He's just the highest ranking, next to the highest ranking of arhat. Constitutes what is termed the middle degree of killing. As a consequence of such an act of killing, one will fall into the realms of hell, hungry spirits and animals, and will suffer all the pains appropriate to a killing of the middle degree. The upper degree of killing refers to the killing of a parent, an arhat, a pratyeka Buddha, or a bodhisattva who has reached the stage of non-retrogression. That would be the 51st stage. For such a crime, one will fall into the great Avicii hell. Good men, if someone were to kill an Ikchantika, that killing would not fall into any of the 3 categories just mentioned. Good men, the various Brahmins that I have said were put to death, all of them were in fact Ikchantikas. In the Benevolent King Sutra, we read the Buddha announced to King Prasenajit Thus I entrust the protections of my teachings to the ruler of the nation rather than to the monks and nuns. Why do I do so? Because they do not possess the kind of power and authority that the king has. The Nirvana Sutra states, now I entrust the correct teaching, which is unexcelled, to the rulers, the ministers, the high officials, and the 4 kinds of Buddhists. Laymen, laywomen, monks and nuns. If anyone should vilify the correct teaching, then the ministers and 4 kinds of Buddhists should reprimand him and bring him to order. It also states, the Buddha replied, Bodhisattva Keshayapa, it is because I was a defender of the correct teaching that I have been able to attain this diamond-like body. Good men, defenders of the correct teaching, need not observe the 5 precepts or practice the rules of proper behavior. Rather, they should carry knives and swords, bows and arrows, halberds and lances. Again, the Buddha said, even though there may be those who observe the 5 precepts, they do not deserve to be called practitioners of the great vehicle. Because only if you protect the great vehicle are you a practitioner of the great vehicle. That's the point. But even if one does not observe the 5 precepts, if one defends the correct teaching, then one may be called a practitioner of the great vehicle. So it's all about protecting the correct teaching from becoming distorted. That's what we're doing right now. Okay? Defenders of the correct teaching, I can raise my hand high on that one. Defenders of the correct teaching ought to arm themselves with knives and swords, weapons and staves. That's why you might see I look a little bulky under the clothes here. Even though they carry swords and staves, I would call them men who observe the precepts, because they're observing the most important precept, which is to protect the correct teaching. The Buddha likewise said, good men, in page 20, second column, first full paragraph. The Buddha likewise said, good men in past ages in this very city of Kushinagara, a Buddha appeared whose name was the thus come one joy increasing. After this Buddha passed away, the correct teaching that he had taught remained in the world for countless millions of years. Finally, only 40 more years were left before the Buddhist teachings were due to come to an end. At that time, there was a monk named Realization of Virtue who observed the precepts. There were many monks at this time who violated the precepts, and when they heard this monk preaching, they all conceived evil designs in their hearts, and, arming themselves with swords and staves, approached this teacher of the law. At this time, the ruler of the kingdom was named Possessor of Virtue. He received reports of what was happening, and in order to defend the teaching, he went at once to the place where the monk was preaching the law and fought with all his might against the evil monks who broke the precepts. As a result, the monk who had been preaching was able to escape grievous injury. But the king received so many wounds from the knives and swords, halberds and lances, that there was not a spot on his body the size of a mustard seed that remained unharmed. At this time, the monk Realization of Virtue praised the king, saying, "Splendid, splendid! You, O king, are now a true defender of the correct teaching. In ages to come, this body of yours will surely become a boundless vessel of the law." You'll be a Buddha. At that time, the king had already heard the teaching, and he felt great joy in his heart. Thereupon, his life came to an end, and he was reborn in the land of the Buddha Akshaboyha, where he became the Buddha's principal disciple. Moreover, all the military leaders, citizens, and associates of the king who had fought beside him or who had rejoiced in his effort were filled with an unflagging determination to achieve enlightenment. And when they died, all of them were reborn in the land of the Buddha Akshaboyha. Later, the monk realization of virtue also died, and he too was reborn in the land of the Buddha, Akshobhya, where he became second among the Buddhist voice-hearer disciples. Thus, if the correct teaching is about to come to an end, this is the way one ought to support and defend it. Keshayapa, the king who lived at that time, was I myself. And the monk who preached the Buddha, Keshayapa, you. Keshayapa, those who defend the correct teaching enjoy this kind of boundless reward. As a consequence, I have been able to obtain the distinguished characteristics that I possess today, to adorn myself with them, and to put on the Dharma body that can never be destroyed by defending the correct teaching. Then the Buddha declared to the Bodhisattva Keshayapa, for this reason, laymen, believers, and others who wish to defend the law should arm themselves with swords and staves and protect it in this manner. In other words, if you've got to fight to protect it, if you do not begrudge your life. Do you understand that that's what this is saying, right? You do understand that that's what this is saying. That's the message that's being delivered by the Daishonin. Okay? Then the Buddha declared to the Bodhisattva Keshayapa, and don't forget this is all being quoted out of the Nirvana Sutra, which is part of the perfect teaching. So we're not talking about something real provisional here he's pulling from. Then the Buddha, pardon me, we're in good shape. Then the Buddha declared to Bodhisattva Keshayapa, for this reason, laymen, believers, and others who wish to defend the law should arm themselves with swords and staves and protect it in this manner. Good men, in the age of impurity and evil, after I have passed away, the nation will fall into devastation and disorder. Men will plunder and steal from one another, and the common people will be reduced to starvation. Because of hunger, many men at that time will declare their determination to leave their families and become monks. Men such as these may be called shave-pates. And a shave-pate is a fake priest, somebody that becomes a priest just to not have to work anymore, right? When the crowd of shave-pates see anyone who is attempting to protect the correct teaching, they will chase after him and drive him away, or even kill him or do him injury. That is why I now give permission for monks who observe the precepts to associate with and keep company with white-robed laymen who bear swords and staves. Even though they carry swords and staves, I would call them men who observe the precepts. But although they may carry swords and staves, they should never use them to take life. He's very clear about that. The Lotus Sutra says, in other words, you arm yourself to be able to defend yourself. People will leave you alone, right? For the most part. The Lotus Sutra says, if a person fails to have faith but instead slanders this sutra, immediately he will destroy all the seeds for become a Buddha in this world. When his life comes to an end, he will enter the Avicii hell. The meaning of these passages from the sutra is perfectly clear. What need is there for me to add any further explanation? If we accept the words of the Lotus Sutra, then we must understand that slandering the Mahayana scriptures is more serious than committing the 5 cardinal sins countless times. Therefore, one who does so will be confined to the great citadel of the Avicii hell and cannot hope for release for an immeasurable length of time. According to the Nirvana Sutra, even though you may give alms to a person who has committed the 5 cardinal sins, you must never give alms to a person who has slandered the law. One who kills so much as an ant will invariably fall into the 3 evil paths, but one who helps eradicate slander of the law will ascend to the state from which there can be no retrogression. Thus, the passage tells us that the monk realization of virtue was reborn as the Buddha Keshayapa, and that king possessor of virtue was reborn as the Buddha Shakyamuni. The Lotus and Nirvana Sutras represent the very heart of the doctrines that Shakyamuni preached during the 5 periods of his teaching life, and those 5 periods are delineated by Tentai, not by Shakyamuni. Okay? That's the whole point here. Actually, this is all leading to the Tendai school's understanding of the Buddhist teachings. which is what that I've shown in practice. The Lotus and Nirvana Sutras represent the very heart of the doctrines that Shakyamuni preached during the 5 periods of his teaching life. Fifth was the perfect teaching, which is the Lotus and Nirvana Sutra. Their warnings must be viewed with the utmost gravity. Top of page 22, first column. Who would fail to heed them? And yet those people who forget about the correct way and slander the law put more trust than ever in Honin's Nimbutsu chosen above all, and grow blinder than ever in their foolishness. Thus, some of them, remembering how their master looked in life, fashioned wooden sculptures and paintings of him, while others, putting faith in his perverse teachings, carved wood blocks with which to print his ugly words. These writings they scatter about throughout the area abounded by the seas, carrying them beyond the cities and into the countryside until wherever honor is paid, it is to the practices of this school. He's talking about Nimbutsu again, and he's talking about Honin. People can remember what Honin, they would make pictures of him, and they would pray to Honin. And into the countryside until wherever honor is paid, it is to the practices of this school, and wherever alms are given, it is to the priests of this school. As a result, we see people cutting off the fingers of the images of Shakyamuni and refashioning them to form the gestures of Amida, which I think Shakyamuni's like this and Amida is like doing something else. They would cut off fingers. They would use Shakyamuni statues, and because Amida makes a different hand sign. What are those called?
Gesture.
Mudras. Because Amida makes a different mudra, which is using not all of the fingers up, like Shakyamuni is. All right, they cut off fingers to turn it into Amida.
Oh.
Do you understand? Okay, so that's what he's talking about. They cut off the fingers of these statues. Okay, it's like, whoa. All right. As a result, we see people cutting off the fingers of the images of Shakyamuni and refashioning them to form the gesture of Amida, or converting the temples. What he's really responding to now what he's going to respond to is the guest has said, hey man, we're a Buddhist country. There's Buddhist temples everywhere. Okay, so how dare you say that we're against Buddhism? He's now saying, yeah, but they've all turned into Amida temples. They've all turned into Nimbutsu temples, okay? He says, as a result, we see people cutting off the fingers of the images of Shakyamuni and refashioning them to reform the gesture of Amida, or converting the temples formerly dedicated to Medicine Master and the thus come one of the Eastern region, and replacing his statues with those of Amida, the thus come one of the Western land. Or we find the ceremony of copying the Lotus Sutra, which had been carried out for over 400 years on Mount Hei, being suspended, and the copying of the 3 Pure Land sutras. I think I was wrong. Mount Hei is not in Rakuji. Mount Hei is Dengyo. Mount Hei being suspended and the copying of the 3 Pure Land Sutras substituted in his place, or the annual lectures on the doctrines of the great teacher Tentai being replaced by the lectures on the teachings of Shantao. Indeed, the slanderous people and their associates are too numerous to count. Are they not destroyers of the Buddha? Are they not destroyers of the law? Are they not destroyers of the Buddhist order? And all their distorted teachings derive from Nimbutsu chosen above all. Alas, how pitiful that people should turn their backs on the true words of prohibition spoken by the thus come one Shakyamuni. How tragic that they should heed the gross and deluded words of this arrogant priest Honin. If we hope to bring order and tranquility to the world without further delay, we must put an end to these slanders of the law that fill the country. Page 22, second column, first full paragraph. The guest said, this is question 8, if we are to put an end to these people who slander the law and do away with those who violate the prohibitions of the Buddha, then are we to condemn them to death as described in the sutra passages you have just cited? If we do that, then we ourselves will be guilty of inflicting injury and death upon others, and will suffer the consequences, will we not? If the Great Collection Sutra, in the Great Collection Sutra, the Buddha says, if a person shaves his head and puts on clerical robes, then whether that person observes the precepts or violates them, both heavenly and human beings should give him alms. In doing so, they are giving alms and support to me, for that person is my son. But if men beat that person, they are beating my son. And if they curse and insult him, they are reviling me. If we stop to consider, we must realize that, regardless of whether one is good or bad, right or wrong, if he is a priest, then he deserves to have alms and nourishment extended to him. For how could one beat and insult the son and still not cause grief and sorrow to the father? The Brahmins of the bamboo staff school who killed the venerable Madhgayana have for a long time been sunk in the depths of the hell of incessant suffering. Because Devadatta murdered the nun Utpalavarna, he has for a long time gasped in the flames of the Avicii hell. Examples from earlier ages make the matter perfectly clear, and later ages fear this offense most of all. You speak of punishing those who slander the law, but to do so would violate the Buddhist prohibitions. I can hardly believe that such a course would be right. How can you justify that? The host answers to question 8. The host said, you have clearly seen the sutra passages that I have cited, and yet you can ask a question like that. Are you beyond the power of your mind to comprehend, or do you fail to understand the reasoning behind them? I certainly have no intention of censoring the sons of the Buddha. My only hatred is for the act of slandering the law. According to the Buddhist teachings, prior to Shakyamuni, slanderous monks would have incurred the death penalty. But since the time of Shakyamuni, the one who can endure, the giving of alms to slanderous monks is forbidden in the sutra teachings. Now, if all the 4 kinds of Buddhists within the 4 seas and the 10,000 lands could only cease giving alms to wicked priests and instead all come over to the side of the good, then how could any more troubles rise to plague us or disasters come to confront us? Next to last question from the guest. With this, the guest moved off his mat in a gesture of respect, straightened the collar of his robe, and said, the Buddhist teachings vary greatly, and it is difficult to investigate each doctrine in full. I have had many doubts and perplexities, and I have been unable to distinguish right from wrong. Nevertheless, this work by the sage Honen, Nimbutsu chosen above all, does in fact exist. And it lumps together all the various Buddhas, sutras, bodhisattvas, and deity, and says that one should discard, close, ignore, and abandon them. The meaning of the text is perfectly clear, and as a result of this, the sages have departed from the nation, the benevolent deities have left their dwelling places, hunger and thirst fill the world, and disease and pestilence spread widely. Now, by citing passages from a wide variety of scriptures, you have clearly demonstrated the rights and wrongs of the matter. Therefore, I have completely forsaken my earlier mistaken convictions, and my ears and eyes have been opened on point after point. There can be no doubt that all people, from the ruler on down to the general populace, rejoice in and desire the stability of the nation and peace of the world. If we can quickly put an end to the alms that are given to those Ikchantikas and ensure that continuing support is instead given to the host of true priests and nuns, if we can still these white waves that trouble the ocean of the Buddha and cut down these green groves that overgrow the mountains of the law, the mountain of the law, then the world may become as peaceful as it was in the golden age of Fuxi and Sinnang, and the nation may flourish as it did under the sage ruler Yao and Shun. After that, there will be time to dip into the waters of the law and to decide which are shallow doctrines and which are deep, and to pay honor to the pillars and beams that support the house of the Buddha. The host exclaimed with delight, "The dove has changed into a hawk, the sparrow into a clam. How gratifying! You have associated with a friend in the orchid room, the place of the truth, and become as straight and as mugwort growing among hemp. if you will truly give consideration to the troubles I have been describing, and put entire faith in these words of mine, then the winds will blow gently, the waves will be calm, and in no time at all we will enjoy bountiful harvests. But a person's heart may change with the times, and the nature of a thing may alter with its surroundings. Just as the moon and the water will be tossed about by waves, or the soldiers in the vanguard will be cowed by the swords of the enemy, so, although at this moment you may say that you believe in my words, I fear that later you will forget them completely. Now, if we wish to first bring to all security, if we wish first of all to bring security to the nation and to pray for our present and future lives, then we must hasten to examine and consider the situation and take measures as soon as possible to remedy it. Why do I say this? Because of the 7 types of disasters described in the Medicine Master Sutra, 5 have already occurred. So what he's now doing, he's saying, and we got to hurry up and do this because there's more bad stuff happening. And now for the first time, he's going to qualify. There are 2 great predictions of which there are things that haven't happened that are going to happen. Okay, so he says, we got to hurry up and do this, all right? Then he's saying, why do I say this? Because of the 7 types of disasters described in the Medicine Master Sutra. 5 have already occurred. Only 2 have yet to appear. The calamity of invasion from foreign lands and the calamity of revolt within one's own domain. And of the 3 calamities mentioned in the Great Collection Sutra, 2 have already made their appearance. Only 1 remains, the disaster of warfare. The different types of disaster and calamity enumerated in the Golden Light Sutra have arisen one after the other. Only that described as marauders from other regions invading and plundering the nation has yet to materialize. Of course, that's why the whole thing about the Mongols are going to be invading. This is the only trouble that has not yet come. And of the 7 disasters listed in the Benevolent King Sutra, 6 are now upon us in full force. Only 1 has not yet appeared, the calamity that occurs when enemies rise up on all 4 sides and invade the nation. Moreover, as the Benevolent King's Sutra says, when a nation becomes disordered, it is the spirits that first show signs of rampancy. Because the spirits become rampant, all the people of the nation become disordered. Now, if we examine the present situation carefully in light of this passage, we will see that the various spirits have for some time been rampant, and that many of the people have perished. If the first predicted misfortune in the sutra has already occurred, as is obvious, then how can we doubt that the later disasters will follow? If in punishment for the evil doctrines that are upheld, the troubles that may have yet to appear should fall upon us one after the other, then it will be too late to act, will it not? Emperors and kings have their foundation in the state and bring peace and order to the age. Ministers and commoners hold possession of their fields and gardens and supply the needs of the world. But if marauders come from other regions to invade the nation, or if revolt breaks out within the domain and the people's lands are seized and plundered, how can there be anything but terror and confusion? If the nation is destroyed and the people's homes are wiped out, then where can one flee for safety? If you care anything about your personal security, you should first of all pray for order and tranquility throughout the 4 quarters of the land. Should you not? Sovereign teacher parent, right? It seems to me that when people are in this world, they all fear what their lot may be in the life to come. So it is that they put their faith in distorted doctrines and pay honor to slanderous teachings. It distresses me that they should be so confused about right and wrong, and at the same time I feel pity that, having embraced Buddhism, they should have chosen the wrong kind. With the power of faith that is in their hearts, why must they recklessly give credence to distorted doctrines? If they do not shake off these delusions that they cling to but continue to harbor erroneous views, then they will quickly leave this world of the living and surely fall into the hell of incessant suffering, as the sutra says they will. Thus, the Great Collection Sutra says Thus, the Great Collection Sutra says, though for countless existences in the past the ruler of a state may have practiced the giving of alms, observed the precepts, and cultivated wisdom, if he sees that my teaching is in danger of perishing and stands idly by without doing anything to protect it, then all the inestimable good roots of goodness that he has planted through the practices just mentioned will be entirely wiped out. Before long, the ruler will fall gravely ill, and after his life has come to an end, he will be reborn in the great hell. And the same fate will befall the ruler's consort, his heir, the high ministers of the state, the lords of the cities, the village heads and generals, the magistrates of districts, and other officials. The Benevolent King Sutra states, if persons destroy the teachings of the Buddha, they will have no filial sons, no harmony with their 6 kinds of relatives, and no aid from the heavenly deities and dragons. Disease and evil demons will come day after day to torment them. Disasters will descend on them incessantly, and misfortunes will dog them wherever they go. And when they die, they will fall into the realms of hell, hungry spirits, and animals. Even if they should be reborn as human beings, they will be destined to become soldiers or slaves. Retribution will follow, as an echo follows a sound, or a shadow follows a form. Someone writing at night may put out the lamp, but the words he has written will still remain. It is the same with the effect of the deeds we perform in the threefold world. The second volume of the Lotus Sutra says, if a person fails to have faith but instead slanders this sutra, when his life comes to an end, he will enter the Avicii hell. And in the never disparaging chapter in the 7th volume, it says, for 1,000 kalpas they underwent great sufferings in the Avicii hell. In the Nirvana Sutra we read, if a person separates himself from good friends, refuses to listen to the correct teaching, and instead embraces evil teachings, then as a result he will sink down to the Avicii hell, where the size of his body will become 84,000 yojanas in total length and breadth. When we examine this wide variety of sutras, we find that they all stress how grave a matter it is to slander the correct teaching. And again, this is all about the correct teaching. How many times has he mentioned Nam Myoho Renge Kyo? Not yet. How pitiful that people should all go out of the gate of the correct teaching and enter so deep into the prison of these distorted doctrines. How stupid that they should fall one after another into the snares of those evil doctrines and remain for so long entangled in this net of slanderous teachings. They lose their way in these mists and miasmas and sink down amid the raging flames of hell. How could one not grieve? How could one not suffer? Therefore, you must quickly reform the tenets that you hold in your heart and embrace the one true vehicle, the single good doctrine of the Lotus Sutra. The single good doctrine of the Lotus Sutra is Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. If you do so, then the threefold world will become the Buddha land. How could a Buddha land ever decline? The regions of the 10 directions will all become treasure realms, and how could a treasure realm ever suffer harm? If you live in a country that knows no decline or diminution, in a land that suffers no harm or disruption, then your body will find peace and security, and your mind will be calm and untroubled. You must believe my words. Heed what I say. Okay, and so this is the guest responding for the last time. The guest said, since it concerns both this life and the lives to come, who could fail to be cautious in a matter such as this? Who could fail to agree with you? Now, when I examine the passages you have cited from the sutras and see exactly what the Buddhas said, I realize that slandering the law is a very grave fault indeed. That violating the law is in truth a terrible offense. I have put all my faith in one Buddha alone, Amida, and rejected all the other Buddhas. I have honored the 3 Pure Land Sutras and set aside the other sutras, but this was not due to any distorted ideas of my own conception. I was simply obeying the words of the eminent men of the past. And the same is true of all other persons in the 10 directions. But now I realize that to do so means to exhaust oneself in futile efforts in this life and to fall into the Avicii hell in the life to come. The texts you have cited are perfectly clear on this point, and their arguments are detailed. They leave no room for doubt. From now on, with your kind instruction to guide me, I wish to continue dispelling the ignorance from my mind. I hope we may set about as quickly as possible taking measures to deal with these slanders against the law and to bring peace to the world without delay, thus inspiring that we may live in safety in this life and enjoy good fortune in the life to come. But it is not enough that I alone should accept and have faith in your words. We must see to it that others as well are warned of their errors. That's the end of the text of the Go Show. We'll start the lecture by President Ikeda on point 9 and 10, I believe it is. Next time we get together at the end of the month.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.